Welcome everyone. In this lecture I'm going to read from my book Heidegger on Death and Being, an answer to the Science-Frage, published by Springer in 2021. And this will be on my reading of Hegel through Heidegger and the explicit attempt by Heidegger to think together being and time rather than being and thought after Hegel and Hegel's understanding of the Begriff, of the concept. And if you'd like to study both Hegel and Heidegger more closely with us, then please follow the link below in the description of this video. So I'm going to read here now from page 18. This is where I'll start. This is from the chapter The Necessity of the Question of Being. In his lecture course from 1930-1931 on the phenomenology of spirit, Hegel's phenomenology obviously, Heidegger points out that Hegel's system answers and finalizes the guiding question of Greek ontology, ti to on, which we can translate as what beings, what are beings. Note that there is no verb here in the Greek, it's just ti to on, what beings. Which means that beings have been, which you can find by the way in Aristotle's Metaphysics, this question, ti to on. Beings have been corroborated in their beingness with certainty, with absolute certainty and knowledge. And this finds expression in the claim to absolute and infinite knowledge Heidegger claims. The science of logic, Hegel's science of logic, is of a timeless truth. The final response to the guiding question claims to be timeless. Beings as such are, insofar as they are, quote from Heidegger, the actual in its genuine and whole reality, or actuality is maybe better for Wirklichkeit, or the idea, which Heidegger takes as the concept. Of course, in Hegel, you look at the encyclopedia, for example, also, you have to see that the idea is not just the concept, but is also objectivity. A correspondence between the two. Yet, argues Heidegger, and this is crucial, the pure concept annuls time. Thus, with Hegel, time is made to disappear. This is a quote from Heidegger. Time disappears behind the dominant presence of the actual. The disappearance of time in Hegel's system, as Heidegger explicitly states, leads to the necessity of the question of being as explicated in being and time. It is crucial to note that Heidegger here explicitly also says that being and time is not existential philosophy, but that being and time rather aims to reconcile or reconnect with the fundamental problem of Occidental ontology, and that simply is the question of being, which has logos as its content, as Heidegger says. So from the beginning, Heidegger is acutely aware of a misunderstanding of being and time as existential philosophy, or anything like this. And it's down to his readers and to Heidegger scholars perhaps also to recognize and be able to recognize and see and be able, just with anyone who reads Hegel too, you need to have the tradition present in spirit, in mind, in order to understand what the text is referring to. The text does not refer to Dasein in its life world, how it runs around and uses cars or hammers or anything like this. It's about something else entirely. With Hegel, the actuality of being is secured and fully explicated, exhibited, comes to full Darstellung, to full presentation. but time is obscured precisely by this utter actuality of Hegel's response. Hegel's finalizing response to the guiding question represents an encrustation and closure. Heidegger wishes to counter this development, this unfolding, with a radical openness of the future. This is also why Heidegger begins to regard possibility as higher than actuality. This is what allows him to pave the way for radical openness and to break free from the encrustation of the metaphysics of presence. Quote from Heidegger, higher than actuality stands possibility. It's the openness of the possible, not the potential, that's more closed. The openness of the notness of the possible, of the likely, as some say, in the methodology of phenomenology, obviously. That's very important to notice also, that phenomenology is supposed to break open this other horizon, this new horizon. So, of course, we can also here say, or we should point to, as I do also in the book, is that death is the utmost possibility for Dasein, for this initial openness in which we participate. Death, finitude, a radical incision, a non-availability. Death, which gives, quote from Heidegger, Dasein, nothing to actualize. There is a profound relationship between death and time, for that matter, also. Moving on to my reading of Hegel through Heidegger, I'd like to say the following. So, the knot that is involved in Dasein's nullity, that is involved in Dasein's being, prohibits an indeterminate and chaotic openness. For there is a limitation through the knot of what can be. So it's not a sheer negative openness that turns into or positive openness that turns into its own negativity. There is already always a knot that's limiting. This is crucial because this defies claims that the understanding of being amounts to a sheer positivity or a prefixed givenness of meaning waiting to be discovered. There is no sheer positivity or givenness in Heidegger. And these readings of Heidegger are common among Hegel scholars, who stress the necessity of negativity for history and world access. But there's no thinker that takes death and, if you like, negativity in quotation marks more seriously than Heidegger. And I have another video lecture on the question of history and negativity on the channel as well, which I'll link to down below in the description of this video. And in my course on Heidegger, we go into this further as well. And at Halcyon we will also offer very soon a course on Hegel. So if you'd like to learn more on Hegel, just follow the link in the description of this video too. So for Stephen Holgate, who's my teacher of Hegel, and from whom I've learned a lot. There is, however, for Stephen, as he writes in his book on Hegel's opening of the science of logic, quote from Stephen Holgate, a definitive horizon of understanding within which all thought of being must occur, which Holgate claims is not the case in Hegel, but is the case in Heidegger. Holgate maintains that Hegel's phenomenology of spirit breaks down the ordinary consciousness of the definitive horizon and shows that absolute knowledge is radically open. This is what Hegel is doing, supposedly. Heidegger's account, however, Holgate says, closes being off and hence is a case of ordinary consciousness. which is the the usual way in which I think Hegelians attack those who stand lower than them. Ordinary consciousness is the understanding that's at work. So the language of being in time, this would mean that being in time on the whole provides but an inauthentic understanding of being. Is this the case? True. There is a determinedness of the horizons of Dasein. Or maybe I should have written determinedness in the sense of there is a limitation to them. But, of course, the horizon itself indicates this, but the horizon is not definitive once and for all. And it's not just a sophisticated reformulation of ordinary consciousness. If the understanding of being were fixated, then Dasein would be static as well. I don't like the word static because it's itself a word of representation. So, the distinction between static and dynamic are representational notions. They give us an immediate image, sort of, almost. It's a very weird way in which the mind works at this point. So, Max Müller, however, says Dasein is as living, and this is the quote, I translated Max Müller here. Dasein is as living understanding of being the sight of being. And this is, I think, what Hegelians often don't appreciate or don't see. Because I think what they do is basically that they turn Dasein into a homunculus. Dasein is not the human being. Dasein is the horizon of all horizons, if you like, the initial openness in which the human being participates, and as such is the living understanding of being. So, Holgate's claim, I say here but facetiously, holds true for the inauthentic mode of the they-self, das Man. The they is truly trapped in a fixed horizon of the understanding and a historically encrusted understanding of being. Heidegger himself explicitly says in Being in Time that we must question what is self-evident and given. Dasein must, however, wrench itself continuously free from what the mode of they takes for granted. What the mode of they takes for granted. The proper understanding of being is a horizon that self constitutes out of the structural totality of Dasein's temporal ecstasies and attunements, I should have added, and primarily, however, out of the future, out of that which is to come, which as such is not fixed yet. It is to come. It can be a promise that is never fulfilled. It was to come. It will have been to come, and it never did come. Future is Zukunft in German, so it is to come. It may as well never come. Right? Especially when it's proclaimed with all certainty. Usually it doesn't really arise then as such. So, there is a not yet and a not that constitutes Dasein's horizons, but any Hegelian should realize that this is deeper than the negativity of Hegel. But these are then not finite, as it were. I mean, not a finite amount, or what does he say? A definitive horizon of understanding. No. A definitive, if that's supposed to mean it's absolutely closed off. That's not the case at all. It's the not that is itself active. And as the not yet opens a myriad of paths of what could come, of what is to come, of what may come, of what will never have come, of what could have come but hasn't, etc. All of this is co-constituting in a living manner the understanding of being, the sense in which Dasein is in the world. So, there's a truly radical openness then, thanks to this not, because it's the possibility that's higher than actuality. Right? Not the potential, but the possible. The Mögliche. Das Mögliche, die Möglichkeit. So there's a sense of mögen here also, of liking, loving, etc. But also, of course, in Vermögen, is not to be capable of, but to be open to something as something. And this much more radical negativity, if you like, is itself, at least in the language of being in time, still conditional on death. And now on to time in Hegel. And this is where Heidegger gets a bit mean, but it's rather funny. So, in Davos, where there was it's weird that it was in Davos, or Davos. In Davos, Heidegger said to Ernst Cassirer, one of his colleagues from Marburg, one of these neo-Kantians who tried to mathematize Kant. He says to him that we have to, the death is introduced, and Heidegger here still speaks in the language of function, to have the function of a radical openness for Dasein. So, following Heidegger's remarks in Davos, I argue that the death opens Dasein for its radical futurity, of that which is to come, which is much better than futurity, and as such death in fact enables Dasein's disclosing of being. The ordinary understanding of time, maintains Heidegger, is not just the time of the they-self, and this is where it gets these very striking remarks in Being in Time. This is towards the end of the book. But also the way in which even philosophy, after Plato, maybe even after Parmenides, etc., doesn't really matter, and especially after Aristotle, because Aristotle specifically introduces time as linear, has often interpreted time. So Hegel's conception of time, Heidegger argues, is, quote, the most radical way in which the vulgar understanding of time has been given form conceptually. This is because Hegel's account of time, I say, depicts the most sustained formalization and philosophical justification of linear time. Hegel first equates time with space. This allows him to posit now states as points in space. The point posits itself as the now, and as the point posits itself, it negates itself. For Hegel, time is intuited becoming, the movement from being to non-being, and vice versa. For every now is already no longer itself and it posits itself. Becoming is the interplay between Entstehen und Vergehen. Genesis, Kaif, Torah. Generation and corruption in English. I don't like the word corruption, it doesn't make sense. Generation and demise perhaps is better. Hence, for Hegel, quote, the being of time is the now, and only the now state. And there is a being of time, there's a substantialization of time. Whereas in Heidegger, an ecstatic temporality is the desubstantialization of being. This is the crucial claim. With the being of time as the now, and the being of the now as the point, the Hegelian conception of time formalizes the vulgar understanding of time. Hegel formalizes and philosophically justifies in the most abstract and redundant way what everybody always already knows, but never cares to question whence this assumption comes, which is that time passes and passes us by. Die Zeit vergeht. The time demises. Vergehen. The future passes into the present, and the present passes into the past, never to have any. Well, okay, that's not true. I'm not writing this here because there is a place for the past in Hegel, obviously. The logic itself is a recollection of the past of thoughts. Hegel is all about recollection, Gedächtnis, memory. But the question is, of course, can this be thought without time, or can this be thought actually without time in the way in which ecstatic time makes it possible to think and understand time? So the past of... There is a past in Hegel, but very often that's a logical past. So, Hence, Hegel's logic is timeless, precisely because Hegel's understanding of time is deeply metaphysical. So, but it's here also important that Heidegger again makes a concrete connection with time and the passing of time, the fleeting of time, and our fleeting knowledge or fleeting understanding of death. Insofar as we haven't become mortal yet, we understand time also merely as passing. And also, and only in passing, Heidegger says this, and I've pointed this out very often, is that ecstatic time is that which arises and gives. So thus time does demise and corrupt and passes by and fleet, but it also gives and grants. This giving and granting, of course, can also turn into a pressuring, right? We speak of the pressure of time. I've got a deadline coming up. I've got this to do and that to do. I don't have enough time. But this all hangs together in this manner, I think. So there's much to be learned from this dialogue between Heidegger and Hegel on time, on history, on negativity, on nothingness, and death. And we will pursue this further here on this channel, also together with Philip Nicholas, who's teaching a course on Hegel. So follow the link down below in the description. You'll find courses to Heidegger, a link to my book, and also you'll find a link to Philip's course on Hegel, which is, I would say, the definitive Hegel course that you can find online. So thank you very much indeed for listening. And as always, I usually don't say this, but I'm a free scholar. I do not have any academic position anywhere. But the way in which, though, I make a living is with the courses and is also by the generous gifts and donations from the viewers and the followers, etc. So if you'd like to support the work, then feel free to send Bitcoin or send a gift via PayPal, for example. Thank you very much indeed. See you soon.